All right, but what this class really is all about, there's one of the things we talk a lot about is the idea that markets are really hyper-local at this point. Fair enough? I mean, we've got so many people out there that are hearing so many messages that are coming across, and so many of those messages are national in orientation. And what we have to be able to do, especially locally, is drill down to a hyper-local understanding of what's going on in your market. So that's what we're going to do today. And once we get this started, the neat thing is we'll start doing it once a month. So every month we just kind of update it. Because if there's anything that's really interesting about data, data only matters when you see the patterns. If you check in and take a little snapshot of data, it doesn't mean a whole lot. The relationship to data has a lot to do with what it was and where it's going, right? Because that's what tells you about where the market is. And the market is decently simple. I mean, we want to make it really complex, but the truth is the market is driven by supply and demand, and we're going to see that today. We're going to talk about the whole concept of supply and demand and being able to take local data from the MLS and drill in and apply supply and demand factors, and supply and demand will always tell you where we are in the market. Overall, we'll probably visit different things as we go, because the economic factors that I'll usually watch on a monthly basis, if I teach an overall course on economic factors, these are the 6 economic factors that I'm watching. These are usually the things that undergirth a marketplace. If you watch the patterns of unemployment, where are they going? Where were they, where are they? Then you've got housing affordability. What's the price and the cost of housing? Is it going up or is it going down? Well, good morning.
Sorry you're late. And there's more people parking. I saw your daughter parking too.
No, don't you worry about it. We're glad to have you. Housing affordability, again, where is it going? Because you can have all of these factors. If people can't afford housing, then you're going to have a market factor that's going to affect supply and demand, right? The supply and demand is always going to be driven by supply, which is going to be the number of listings available, and demand, the demand or the buyers in the marketplace that are buying those houses. So if you've got housing affordability as a problem, it's going to shrink demand. It's going to shrink demand. Home sales, which is where we're really going to focus our time. Home sales is where we're really going to look at that relationship and that interaction for that. Interest rates and mortgage availability, have we seen that change the market like within really almost overnight? The minute it started moving, here's another interesting thing. I've mentioned it before if you've been in a different class, but when you wanna really take in the impact of a market, there's a book called Sway. Y'all have heard me mention it? Sway, The Irresistible Pull of Irrational Behavior. And it was a book that was written by 2 brothers about another individual who won a Nobel Peace Prize for his study in loss aversion. And what he determined is that there was twice the emotional impact from loss than there is for the opportunity of gain. And the very interesting thing, the bottom line interesting thing about the book is that you would think that anything that gets into loss aversion, the study of how humans can interact with that, would fall into the category of psychology. But the truth is he won the Nobel Peace Prize in the area of economics. Because what they determined is that every economy is driven by fear. The main underlying factor is fear, which is a really interesting thing when you think about whether you take a local government, a national government, an international government, that they know that the more fear there is within the marketplace, the more the consumer fears, the more you can shut them down. Because fear is driven by 2 things. The fear of loss, I thought you was in the best. Fear of loss and a commitment to a chosen path. So when you think about that, it's like, I'm on this path, I've been on this path, I'm not going to get off of it now, right? And that kind of connection to a process, regardless of whether that process is heading for a cliff, you're still on it, you're committed to it, right? And so your goal is to kind of break that, and people are held by that fear. So when you look at this whole concept of interest rates changing creates what?
in the consumer's mind? Fear. And as soon as they have that fear, it starts to shut them down. It doesn't even matter whether you come up with a logical presentation that says, yeah, but the interest rates are higher, but that just eliminated all the multiple offers, and so now you're going to get it at a better price. You're speaking gain, and they're speaking loss. And so when you think about that, when you think about it from a sales standpoint, if fear of loss has twice the emotional impact that the opportunity for gain does, you will never win that argument. You'll never win that argument. I learned a long time ago from a sales standpoint that the fear you have to focus on the idea, and I don't mean manipulation, I mean understanding the human mind, right? So if I'm sitting in front of somebody and I know they're shutting down and they're going to wait, how many of y'all are dealing with I'm going to wait? If they're going to wait, then you've got to be thinking about they have a fear of making a decision. So the only way that I'm going to counteract that is to switch the concept of fear of waiting to the fear if I don't make the decision. You know, it's like what happens, the fear is if I don't buy versus if I do buy. They're in a fear if I do buy. They need to be in fear if I don't buy. What do you lose if you don't buy? Not what do I gain if I buy? What do I lose if I don't buy? At least you're on an equal playing field when you start to have those kind of conversations. Okay, so just be aware of that. All right, and then foreclosures and short sales, we don't see obviously a lot of that, but there is some happening. Yeah, there is, because I had an individual call me, and they had information on a piece of property, and I'm looking through it, I'm thinking, it's nowhere. And I said, go give me that address. And I looked through it, and of course, it was on an auction site for a foreclosure scenario. And when I opened up that site and looked at all the foreclosures, I mean, there was probably 25, 30 of them sitting at addresses we would all recognize, streets that we would know. So there's things out there that are still underlying, but they're underlying in enough of a quiet storm, so to speak, that we don't even know they're there yet. And they're not going to be there for a while because too many people have way too much equity to walk away from a house. And until that starts to shift and prices start to, come down a little bit, that's not going to be a major factor. And then vacancy rates, which people are always like, what does that have to do with it? But vacancy rates tend to be the earliest indicator of an issue. Because basically what a vacancy rate is telling you is that somebody is walking away from the home well before they even have a foreclosure, right? Or people are exiting properties that they're renting and they're leaving them. The houses are sitting, somebody moves out of a house and all of a sudden you can't get a tenant back in. It's not an immediate, they're waiting at the door. It's 2 months, 3 months, so there's a lot of vacancies. Those are usually indicators that something else is happening. And if you see that and you start drilling into some of the other things, you'll start to see the pattern of why. Okay? So those are usually the 6. Again, we won't do it today, but we could easily do another session that just gives you the indicators for each. Because if I just check those and watch them on a monthly basis, it tells me what's going on beneath that particular economy, beneath that particular market by watching all of them. All right, so as I said, we're going to talk about home sales today, and home sales are, again, going to be driven by supply and demand. How many of y'all have been with me already? We talked a little bit about this, right? I've got to revisit it because there's other people that are in here today that are here for the first time, and we have to get that foundation before we go into this information. But there are 2 scenarios that you really have to be aware of. And here's the other thing that's exciting about what happens here, is that this market is changing, right? It's shifting. And the people who are going to make money are the ones that shift with the market. When the market shifts, your skill sets shift. And if you get that awareness, if you have that aha moment that you're thinking, and I've actually had this conversation with a couple of coaching clients this last week where we were talking about it, and I said, tell me specifically, give me some specifics of how you change your skill sets. Tell me what they are. Because they all say, oh yeah, I know the market's shifting. I'll say, really? Tell me where you shifted. Tell me what you're doing differently. And so when you start thinking, what are we doing differently? How have I changed? Are there different dialogues? Are there different techniques? Are there different strategies? I mean, we were talking about just pricing and walking in and having a conversation with the seller about what their expectations are for pricing. Do they have to be a little bit more aware of how an appraiser might affect pricing now versus how an appraiser affected pricing a year ago? Right? What is that? How do we set them up for it so that we're controlling it later? And there's a couple of things that I'm getting into video and had a conversation about the whole concept of measuring twice and cutting once. You've heard that? That it's become even more important to think it through in advance, measure twice, lay it all out, so when you get to the problem later, you've already set them up. They already understand what could happen. So when you get there, you're coming back and saying, remember when we had that conversation? Here is what we can expect now, right? Measure twice and cut once, which goes to what you were talking about, Dalen, is drilling in and knowing the market well enough that you start to change, just like we did in 2014 when the market started to shut down some, right? So a market in transition is one market. A market retraction is another market. And what I'll find when I'm talking to an agent is they confuse the two. A number of agents that have been doing it for a long time will understand the difference, but market in transition and market retraction are two separate things. In market in transition, again, we talk about supply and demand. The fluid relationship between supply and demand is just that. It kind of does this. It's like, okay, what's happening to supply today? What's happening to demand today? Maybe 1 month, there's a certain relationship between them, and the next month, instead of going in one predictable direction, maybe it changes a little bit. How many of y'all have had, all of a sudden you've got a lot of houses to look at, and then all of a sudden you're in a multiple offer, right? Yeah. It's like, man, this is a little bit less predictable. That's what a market in transition does to you. Whereas a market in retraction has a definite relationship between supply and demand. There's been enough factors that have kicked in that you can define a very predictable relationship between how supply and demand are interacting with each other. Okay? So let's go down to a little bit more. In market retraction, the decrease of sales or the buyer demand in a given market that were previously active is occurring. That's the first thing. And the increase in supply accelerates when it comes to market retraction. So you've got this supply increasing. So based on what I just told you, are we in retraction? No. I mean, we got a factor right now. We surely don't have an increase in supply. So are we having a decrease in demand?
No.
Well, to a certain extent, because half of you said they all told you they want to wait, right? Well, you may have buyers, but are they jumping in? See, there's another definition. That's another different, training class of ready, willing, and able.
Yeah.
Every market has a different definition for ready, willing, and able, and that's another skill set, redefining what ready, willing, and able means. So if we've got ready, willing, and able in this market and they're waiting, if they go, I'm going to wait, they may be willing, they may be able, but are they ready? And if you don't have a ready, willing, and able buyer, you don't have an active buyer. You have a buyer who is in the pipeline that may be future income, but you can't depend on them today to make a paycheck, right? And you have to be aware of that because, again, so many times agents will get to the point where they get comfortable because they've got this pool of buyers. But when you really figure out of that pool how many are ready to do something, there's not a lot. Okay? And that's when you have to go back to what you said, Dayla, which is I've got to double up at this point, and I've got to make sure I've got twice the people that I'm working with to get the same amount of production from before. Right? Hello, Kat. Good to see you. You are good. You're good. It's nice to see you. You're in good company. All right. this is going to be similar to the graph that you're going to get used to if you're coming and if you choose to come on a monthly basis. This is part of what we're going to be looking at. We're going to look at this relationship again of supply and demand. In a buyer's market, you actually have obviously the inventory increasing and sales decreasing. And so a lot of times people would do this, like we were talking about before, and they would think, I like all this information, but I'm not taking this to a seller. You know, I'll overwhelm them, they'll glaze over, and I'll lose them. But there's some simplicity that you can turn this into, right? I mean, we might understand that inventory increases and sales decrease, but a very simple mental image are these two arrows right here. I mean, this is what, right? This is what, in this case, a buyer's market looks like. Inventory is increasing, sales are decreasing. And on the back side, in a seller's market, inventory is decreasing and sales are increasing. That's a very simple picture mentally of what it looks like. One of the things, again, when we hit retraction, when you're in that scenario where it's very predictable, one of the things you have to know is that during that time, there are so many people that start shutting down. They start spending less. They start they start to get, very inclusive when it comes to risk factor. And what you have to understand is when the market retracts, that's not when you retract, it's when you push. It's when you start spending more money. It's when you start spending more time. It's when you start spending more effort. Because while you're doing that, you've got another large group over here that are shutting down and they're insulating. And it's your job to get your share of the market and go get their share of the market. That's just the truth. It really is the fittest survives, right? Amen. And that's what I love about this. So, I mean, I love the idea that, when we have groups of people like this, that it really is the group that's ready to drill in and go get the market. I've always thought, in fact, I'm thankful for some people that, raised me in the business from a management standpoint. They used to tell us every week that we just know that we're good in a great market, but we are fierce in a challenged one. We're the ones to worry about when the market challenges because we know how to shift our skill sets and go get it. Okay? So again, that's what we'll talk about today. Here's your 4 stages in that market shift. These are the 4 stages in the market shift. Oh, there you go. Hello, Drew. Come on around. Is there one back there for him? Oh, it's in that one. When these 4 things happen, inventory increases, sales decrease. When those 2 things have occurred, inventories increase, sales have decreased, you're going to automatically get an increase in market, days on market. And when that happens, then you're going to move to the prices starting to decrease. So when all 4 of those things have occurred, that's when you have market retraction. Market retraction is when all 4 of those stages have occurred. And when you're in that mode, if you know you've got market retraction, are you going to go and present something different to a seller? Mm-hmm. Because once you get into market retraction, if you're not ahead of it, you will chase the market down. Mm-hmm. And that's when we do a disservice to the seller. Okay, so when you're watching basic data, it makes that difference. A market in transition is going to, again, be that inventory increasing and sales decreasing. Remember we said there's a fluid kind of relationship? Well, usually you have inventory increase and sales decrease. Didn't we have this happen before this? Sales have decreased, but the inventory has not increased. And so this fluidity is just kind of going back and forth at this point. And if we looked at this first factor, and bear with us because you read in the last class where we talked about this, but we're going someplace else. So bear with it for a minute. You could have been 5 minutes later. It could have been okay. All right. But this is like when you look, and I didn't change it to April. April is pretty much the same thing. But you can look here and see that new listings in March were dropping dramatically. I mean, by the time that ended to date, we were off 17% when it came to listings year to date. And then we start looking into the months. I mean, we're at 22% off in February. We're at 20%, 21% off in March. Obviously, it doesn't look like it's shifting in that direction anytime soon, okay? So we look back and go, okay, at the first stage was inventory increasing. That's not happening. But then when we look at indicators of a changing market, instead of decreasing, when we go to closed sales in March, they're off by 28%. So now let's go back and look at that, and that's not the case, is it? Inventory decreasing, sales decreasing, which means the arrows are going in which direction? The same direction. The same. Anytime, again, that mental quick picture that just kind of tells you where you are, that you could communicate to somebody else, is that any time the arrows are going in the same direction, the market's in transition. Period. It's not a well-defined buyer market, and it's not a well-defined seller market. And when that happens, everyone's confused. The buyers are frustrated. The sellers are frustrated. The agents are frustrated. Everybody feels the confusion. And what you have to know from a skill set standpoint is that this is normal. It is what it is. That's what it's supposed to feel like. The market's going all over the place, which then means drill further. Start getting into hyper-local focus. Go into the neighborhood and find out what's going on with it. Because are you all finding in this market that you have some pockets where you have multiple offers and some where the house is sitting, right? It's multiple, I mean, it's a hyper-local scenario. So let's go into this. Again, we knew that this was the foundation of a multiple market, right? That was the multiple sellers market. And then this has changed, so that's gone away. You only have it in pockets at this point. So we're going to drill in now to the two factors, and you all have paperwork in front of you. Here's the two simple factors that if you start watching them on a monthly basis, when this report comes out, this is the monthly report, right? You don't have the full monthly report. I pulled specific pages that will make it simple for you to look into the monthly. When we used to do this, we would do it every month in the office. And so when they would be laid out when they came in, and it was so fun because when we first started, the agents would come in and we used to have a saying, they look like calves in a hailstorm. You know, it's like they didn't know what to do. What am I supposed to do with this mess? And by about the fourth, fifth month, I'd walk in and the heads were down and they were calculating. I mean, they were pulling those steps. Am I right? They wanted to know. It's like, I'm not waiting for the class to start. Let's figure out where we're going. They were ready to talk about it because it was very simple to take this information, plug it in, and read it. So the two things, and I put this up only because this is the last full year. You're going to want to go back and build your data. You're going to want to go back and make sure that you've checked to see what was 21, what was 22. You kind of see those patterns. And you're going to see where I've graphed that over the years, because I think I've been probably doing this since 2003. I mean, it's really been that long of just watching every year where's the market going. The interesting thing about that is it's very hard for people to argue the point. Because I've always said, you can argue with my theory, but you can't argue with my theory. Right? You can tell me my theory is wrong, but don't tell me my experience was wrong. I'll show it to you. So that's part of the cool part about having the data. Here's what absorption ratios are. It's not absorption rates, it's absorption ratios. And what it is the number of closed sales. So think about that, right? Supply, demand, the number of closed sales that occur in comparison to the number of listings taken during the exact same period of time. That's what you're going to compare. And so to get that, you're going to take closed sales, divide them by the number of listings, and that's going to give you your current absorption ratio during that period of time. If you didn't get that right now, if you're glazing over and you're a calf in a hailstorm at the moment, hold tight because I'm going to show it and you're going to do it yourself, okay? So again, absorption rates, people say, oh, I've heard that. No, we're not talking about rates. Rates is that relationship, absorption rates, where the number of months it takes for inventory to clear a market. Less than 6 is usually going to be a buyer's market indicator. Really, 4 to 6 is kind of like that neutral zone. And anything over 6, if it takes more than 6 months, it's usually an indicator that you're in a seller's market. That's a different factor. That's absorption rates. And that's it. In this report, there's always something showing you where they are. And the interesting thing is you can lay it out as an additional layover, and you can do this information, then go check your rates, And if you've got 1 month, 1.5, less than 1.84, I don't care what the demand is. If those numbers are really that low, you are still in a dramatic transition. And what we're trying to measure by doing this monthly is how far are we from the change? We know that there's a transition. Are we this close to the transition completing and turning into a seller's market? Or are we this close to the market or the transition completing and shifting to a seller's market? Let's go all the way down to 2007. And y'all are going, oh my gosh, you're going to be here till 3? It's going to go quick, okay? The interesting thing is way back then, because we were obviously trying to figure out what in the heck is going on. Anybody remember 2007? Right? Right. It was like, wow. And it was so funny. I taught a class, I'll never forget, I taught a class in Northern Virginia, and the lady walked up to me and she says, Pam, you know, like 2 weeks ago we walked in and they would go to their MLS. I couldn't believe this, you know, this large MLS up there. And they were sort of passing out cards of houses that were available. I guess they must have been a joint group and they'd come in and collect them. And she said there was nothing. And all of a sudden this week, there's like all these listings that are available. It's like somebody turned the water faucet off. It's like just overnight it went. When the truth is, it was coming for a very long time, and all that happened is that we got to that place where it all of a sudden became noticeable. Everybody was aware of it. And so when you look at this, you can see that back in 2005, and I remember drilling into this really hard, trying to find a norm. It was like, where do I get a norm that if at least I can align with the norm, I know what's happening? And so here we were in 2007, and we were at about 48% absorption. Whatever was coming on the market and closing was only about 48% of everything that was listed. So if we were to throw a number out, that's 1 out of every what? 2 houses are selling. So immediately, if you're really paying attention to stats, immediately I should be able to walk into a seller just on this minor amount of information and say, John and Mary, just so that you know, in our market, 1 out of every 2 homes are selling. You got a 50-50 shot of selling your home. Here's how I'm going to increase that percentage. Here are my strategies for increasing that percentage, right? It's like, what do you do with the data that matters to the seller? Then, and look at how it went from 57 to 48 and went from 75 to 57. So the interesting thing when you're starting to really track data, remember, data only matters based on the previous and where it's going. It's like you've got to see your patterns. Is we went from 3 out of 4 homes selling to 1 out of 2 homes selling. Dramatic shift in the market over that 2-year period. Okay? And this is how we got that. The 24,000 divided by the 49,000 listings equals that ratio. Get back to that. That divided by this equals that. So I want you to remember that, because in just a little bit, you're going to calculate them for the month. Okay? So that's your absorption ratio. Okay, so it's going to be 24,000 divided into 49,000 equals 48.2%. And what that basically is 24,000 people closed on houses through the end of December of 2007. And there were 49,944 houses taken as a listing. So 50,000 houses came on the market, about 24,000 sold. That was a little snapshot, quick picture of what really happened that year. Okay? So let's see. Then you can see here that just at the end of the year, I would just graph. I would graph during the year, but then at the end of the year, I would just start pegging every year, and it would show me clearly what was happening. Because remember I said here in 2007, they said, Pam, it's like somebody shut they turned the water faucet off. And I said, no, it felt that way, but look at this. Here's the reality of it. Here was 2007. 1, 2, 3, 4. There were 4 solid years before we got to 7, and 5 by the time we got to 2008. For 5 years, the market told us it was changing. Not 5 months, not 30 days, 5 years, the market said, we're going down, things are changing, it's getting, but here's the difference. When you're looking at this, within this period of time, the real estate, when they talk about a bust, here's the other thing, just to share this with you really quick, is when you're talking about this whole concept of a bust versus a bubble, like you've got your bubble and then everything breaks apart and things change, that it says that historically the real estate values don't necessarily drop, they just remain flat. Well, during that same time, that's what was happening in 2006, that was happening to sales prices. But the average and the median, did they go flat? All through 2006. Here's what they did through 2007. So again, another factor from data that was available that said, even here, when things were still going well, we were still kind of above the line, so it wasn't as obvious where we're going, wow, you were still going out there, markets were still moving, you were still selling, but things were changing and indicators told us they were coming at us. Okay? And so the 2006 and 2007 flatlining, which comes back to that bust mentality. But here's the reality of this. When I graphed this, what I found is, just like we talked about absorption rates have the months, well, in absorption ratios, what I found is everything 50% and above will tend to indicate a seller's market. Now, there is a neutral zone, and we're going to get to that in a minute. And everything below that 50% would tend to be a buyer's market. That's really how the patterns, really kind of shook out. And this place right here, this neutral zone of 50 to 60%, when it got graphed in that realm, then it was in what I called a transitionary market. And I needed to watch the direction because this was telling me the market was in the process of possibly shifting. And depending on how high we were or low we were, I was getting closer and closer to that line that told me the market was going to change. So when we look at this, the direction of the activity once we hit here is telling me whether I'm moving out of a seller's market into a buyer's market or I'm moving out of a buyer's market into a seller's market. And think about this. Here's 2010, buyer's market. 2011, we were crossing the line into the neutral zone. Did 2011 feel like the sellers were in control? No. We were just crossing the line into a shift, and now it became the responsibility of watching. And the closer I got to this line up here, the more I knew I was moving to the buyer getting a little bit more control. But it's stunning because look at 2014, which you said, Dela. Here's 12, 13, right? We knew it, we felt it. It dropped. And at that point, when you're watching it, then what I was looking at, because I remember we were in the office and thinking, are we in a double dip? Or is this just, kind of an interim market that is like transitioning, right? It's fluid, it's unpredictable. How much frustration do you think was going on in that market right there? Right? Remember? Yeah. The sellers were starting to feel in 13 like they were gaining some traction, then all of a sudden the buyers went, we're going to wait. Because I remember in 14, they started to put out all kinds of articles. All of the economists for NAR and all these other places were writing these articles about how the buyers had changed, choices at this point, and they could wait, and the inventory was increasing, and they were right. But then again, it came down and started turning immediately. And we'll see at the end, just where we are right now. So that was like at the end of 17, and we started to cross over 60. What's interesting is once you cross over 60, when you start to get to a 70% market and you're going up, the majority of the market's in multiple offers. It's such a predictable, simple way of tracking a market, okay? So again, being very sensitive to that. So remember, let's look at these now. So our factors again, number of listings taken. Well, here's January 2022. I'm going to take you through a full year. I'm going to take you through the last year in full and show you what happened. And so that number of listed properties between here and there, this is what happened in January. In January of 2022, look what the absorption was.
It's true.
92%. You think you might want to talk to your buyers during their counseling session and tell them if they're not ready, willing, and able, they might want to wait for a while, or you might want to wait for a while to work with them? Because the person that you sit down with in that market right there that's looking at buying a house, who's not realistic about what it's going to take to be ready, willing, and able. I mean, we went through a period of time that ready, willing, and able was, how much money do you have above sales price to guarantee in order for me to get you to first in line? And if I had that person and they had no money, then I would ship them to well, then let's start looking for houses that have been on the market for 21 days or more. Let's start looking for those things that are still sitting there for some reason, because that's the only chance I've got of getting you to first in line. Skill set shift. Yeah. Okay, so listings, that's our first factor. And then the second factor is going to be the number of close properties, and that's where they're going to be tracking right here. So sales, in this case, January showed sales were up 1.4 and they were down 15. Listings down 15, sales up about 2. Okay? So if we looked at arrows, simple, what kind of market? Buyers, sellers. Sellers market. Arrows are down on listings, they're up on sales. Okay, let's go to February at this point. What happened?
In the same direction and transition.
Say it again.
They're going both in the same direction. It's a transition buildings.
Correction. So we just saw a transition occur. There's something that just happened with transition starting to occur before the interest. And you know, it's so funny. People say, you know, tell me when the market's changing. You know, tell me when we hit the bottom. Tell me when, and you never know until you've gotten past it if you're just feeling it. But when you start watching stats, you can see when the market shifts. So we had inventory down by 8% and sales down by, in this case, 0.5%, less than 1%. It's transitioning. But is the lack of sales being outperformed by the lack of listings? Cost it down. Now think about it. Lack of sales is off by less than 1%. Yes. What's listings off by? 8.2. 8.2%. So if we have less buyers in the market, that we've got 1% less buyers in the market and we have 8% less listings, do you think that the lack of inventory is counteracting the lack of buyers? Right? And see, this becomes the next thing you're watching. So we're not only watching this, and it tells us 82%. I mean, if you've got absorption of 82%, the buyers are not in control still, right? And then we have this transitioning market, and we're going, okay, but it's in transition. Well, our job is to figure out who's in control. But this snapshot of time, who's in control? Well, in this case, the sellers are still in control, because even though the articles might be written that buyers are starting to wait and the interest rate, but see, the interest rates hadn't changed by then. It was coming, they were talking, but it hadn't happened yet. So let's go to March, off by 2%, off by 7.4%. And so you can feel a little bit more of the buyer pool is shrinking. The listings are shrinking just a little bit more in terms of the numbers, but who's still in control? The seller. So April, we'll go to April, off by 5%, off by 8%, but we're still sitting at 79. It's starting, you can feel it's starting. And where did the interest rate start to change?
August.
In July. It's in July. They started happening in around June, right? We started, I remember I had one in May, but we got trouble on a rate. You know, it was like it was nooning over the weekend. So we get to May, and we're off by 8.7 and 5.1. But this is still sitting at 80%. We're still sitting at an 80% rate. But is this, you know, we're starting to track these things. Is the is the yearly activity monthly starting to do this, right? I mean, it was different here, but when we go back and we look at this, it was 92, then 82, then 81, and then we had 79 that was a little bit off, and then we went right back up to about 80, then a little bit lower on 80. I mean, it sat right there on that kind of flatlining. So by July, we're off by 9% in sales, we're off by 10% in listings. They're starting to align with each other, but then we get into the factor of seasonal effects, right? And how long has it been since we had to worry about like what we used to call Christmas in July?
Yeah, a couple years.
Right? I mean, that used to happen. We would kind of expect that July would start to just all of a sudden disappear a little bit. Things would slow down, and then we'd wait for them to come back from, being on vacation and go back to school and get back into the market. So we look at that, it's like, okay, well, we've got this kind of balance of off by 10%, off by 10% approximately, but we're still sitting at 80% absorption. It is July. The market is changing. They're starting to read, the articles about the interest rates changing. That's going to affect the buyers even more because they truly can afford less. So then we get into August, off by 10.9, off by 11. We got this flat line, but we're still sitting at 81. Off by 12, off by 11. That was in September, but we're still sitting at 82. It's still, again, they're kind of running right. This one's off by 14, on by 12, but again, the absorption is there's still enough going on, but it's still sitting at 83%. By November, off by 15, off by 13, and off by 17, and off by 13. We ended up in December still at 85%. The buyer pool was shrinking. We went into the first of the year with the market definitely changing, but I'm still sitting at 85%. So when you all went out to see your sellers, we're surely not going to go tell them that they've got to start doing all kinds of stuff. We got to get your price down, because they're still, in many ways, in the driver's seat. We were still seeing a lot of markets where you put a house on the market, and as long as it was, we'd call it price right and parade ready, right? They sell. So let's go then into January of 2023. Look at that. Off by 33% in January, all by 5.9, and this drop. Now, this has a lot to do with seasonal. But look at the other 2 years. Somewhere between 50 and 60 is a normal start to a market in January. But we've been so programmed to, oh my gosh, there is no December or January market anymore. It just keeps going. We could have listed it at any time we wanted to during those years and they'd sell. But you can see that it started in a very different way in 2023. And again, if I'm going out to see that seller, I'm going to have to drill into the neighborhood, figure out from that neighborhood what kind of absorption it's getting. Do I plan for multiple offers? Do I not plan for multiple offers? How many of you all were getting multiple offers, but there were no longer 20, there were 3? Right? And that's a different market. It's a totally different market. All right, go to February. Now we've gone up, but that's a normal shift of we're starting to move into a market pattern of, as we know, February, March, April tends to be busy, and then it kind of dies off again. But 27% off, 15% off still. But wouldn't you believe that if there's 30% less buyers in the market, so there's 1 out of 3 buyers is no longer in the market. And so should that be affecting how you talk to your sellers? Right? Even if you're going into a house where you believe you'll be in a neighborhood of multiple offers. I just did one where I really believed we'd get a multiple offer. It was a beautiful house. We staged it. We did all that we should have done. We pushed a lot of people through on a Saturday and a Sunday. I ended up with 3 offers. And instead of getting a guarantee no matter what, right, we pushed the price $15,000 above list price instead of 30 or 40. So we got $15,000 above list price, and I got a $15,000 guarantee, not a guarantee no matter what. Not a, appraisal, waive the appraisal, will guarantee your price. I had to modify, and I told the seller going in, I'm going to do everything I can to get you multiple offers. And if I can't get them, nobody can. And that's what I told them. I promise you, if I don't get them, nobody's getting them. This is what I'm going to do. This is what we've got. These are the factors. And if we get to this point, I'm going to fight to get that person. I'm going to do everything I can, because I know right here that seller is not in the same driver's seat. They're still in a strong position, but they're not where they were before. And so I said to that individual at that time, I said, I'm going to do everything I can to get the buyer to own the difference. Right? Before I didn't want to push the price too high. As a matter of fact, and I'll just give you the specific. It was only a house that was at $375, but the best comp I had in the neighborhood was $350. Now this house was meticulous, and I had all the information for the appraiser. The lockbox went off. I met him at 7:15 on the morning on a Saturday. He wasn't getting in that house without seeing me, and had everything to lay out for them. But when we went in, we got it pushed. I said, I'm going to push you to the 375, because where was their mental mind? They were still at that place where I want the max I can get for this house. And I'm showing them all the data, and I'm saying the market has shifted. Buyers are off buy at this point. You're with the right agent, because I'm going to do everything I can to get you as many multiple offers as possible in this market. This is what's going to be required of you. And they stayed, they did a phenomenal job. But when we ended up, I said, I cannot push it past 375, because if I do, I own it. You own it. I've got to fight for that appraisal value with the appraiser when he comes in. But if I put it at 375 and I get the buyer to push and get them to own it, then I have my best chance of getting you that price. So they agreed. They didn't want 375. They wanted to be up close to 390, 400. I said, I can't get you there. If I get you there, I can get somebody to pay for it, and then the appraiser's going to hit us, and we own it. So we went out at 375. We pushed to 390. We got the appraisal. The buyer guaranteed the $15,000. So even if it came in at 375, I'm still getting 390. And all of that authority and that confidence to walk in and say, I can't do that. I don't have the ability. I do not believe I can get the buyer who's going to give me a guarantee no matter what. I can get you some, but I can't get you what I could get you a year ago. And because of that, it changed the way that I presented to the seller. And when we got the value and we got the guarantee, it went to closing and we were good. Okay? But that comes from, again, studying the stats. So here we go in March, 72%. Again, this is partially because we're back to some normal patterns of the market is surging, some because we're in a spring market. We didn't have a spring market in like the last couple of years. We just had a market, right? We had a freight train. It's what we had. So we're off by 18 and we're off by 27. Again, it's just this transition. It's like, what in the heck is going on? And then we're going to come from there to April. Okay? So now it's your turn.
So let me answer your question.
Yes.
So, as we saw the gap between the ratio for supply and demand change, is that an indicator of which direction the market might be headed?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So as the gap goes smaller and then it goes.
Yes.
Okay.
Because and what's interesting though is that there still is such a shortage of properties,
Right.
that as the gap gets bigger and bigger, it's moving that line closer to where you're transitioning to a point where you're starting to move towards the buyer's market. But we're not there.
Right. Of course.
We can feel it. We know the line is going in that direction, but it's not there. Okay, and that's where that confusion comes in. That's why you have to just watch this fluid relationship. True, and then we'll go to day one. Oh, wait, come in. Say it again.
What column are we using? Are we using outside year-to-date totals for.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that question. All right, here's your new listing summary. So you're going to take these. Now, this is what people will say all the time. Well, didn't I just take the month? I've always tracked year to date because the year to date is kind of this building up of the entire year instead of taking this little snapshot. Where are we as we keep piling one month on top of each other? How is the market responding? So you've got the neat thing about our MLS is it gives you the 20, 21, 22, and 23. It gives you the 3-year comparison immediately. All you have to do is go to this report, and this is summary page 10. In this report, when you pull it up out of MLS, and it's available to everybody, there is a page 10, and when you pull it up, it's going to have this information. You're going to go to year-to-date totals. I do South Side. I don't take Peninsula. I don't include Peninsula. I've taught some classes on the Peninsula side, and I always use, obviously, their column. What's really interesting is their market is almost exactly the same. It's just smaller. Mm-hmm. But the ratio and the performance is almost exactly the same. True.
So it was trying to do the light. I think some hours ago.
You have a pencil, Nene? What did you want?
Pencil, no.
Oh, she was?
She walked the other way. Well,
Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
No.
Yes.
I'll question about winter and spring market in this area. So is that what I'm kind of it's represented with a buyer and general like, oh, I don't really want to wait for winter. Could you tell them to wait until spring? Or like winter so that it maybe you know a better show?
It would really, honest to gosh, I would have to be in the midst of whatever that data was at that moment. I would be studying the data and I'd be sitting down to figure out whether that's a true story or it's not. Because if I'm looking and I can see that inventory is still dramatically off, one of the things that I always like about what Warren Buffett said, and which aligns with the mental message and sway, is he would say that when others are cautious, and he used the word greedy, and when others are greedy, I'm cautious. I always his goal was always run in the opposite direction of the herd, right? And if the economy is going to be driven by people who are in fear, do we make the right decision when we're in fear? Which is why, again, part of our job when we sit down for buyer counseling or we sit down for seller counseling is to know our data well enough to be able to say, tell me how you came to that conclusion. Let's talk about this. I hear you say you want to wait. Tell me how you came to that conclusion. Well, whatever it happens to be. What article did they see? I was watching TV last night. Well, I'm going to let them dump whatever that information is, and then I'm going to pull them back to their market, the hyper-local message of what's going on, and be able to say, John Derry, I understand that whatever you're hearing makes you believe that we might be back at this bust market, but the bust market had surging inventory. Fair enough? Mm-hmm. We had everybody in the world dumping properties, including banks and everybody else that was bringing, foreclosures and short sales and people walking away for houses, trying to do the short sale, reality that we all dealt with. That's not here. And until that inventory starts to climb, they think it's going to be different in 6 months, and there's nothing in our stats that tell us that. There's nothing that says our market's going to be different in 6 months. Now, if we watch it close enough, maybe we'll have a better indication of that at that point. Okay? So here's your new listing summary, and then let's see, and then there's your settled sales. You're not going to use pending. People will argue that point would be, I just don't use it. It's pending to me is a lead in to the next month. It's telling me where the market's going to be next month. What's that relationship with what's happening in the market next month, okay? So I'm going to take settled sales here today and same on south side. I want you to take those. I want you to go to your graph, and I want you to plug in the right number in the right block, okay? And we always say that we're going to practice no agent left behind. So look next to you, and if they don't have the right number in the right block, help them. Say, I love you. Good effort. Now let me tell you where that number's supposed to be.
I'm going to walk you through how to do this ourselves. So it's your turn. Let's do some math. If you are on your computer watching this and you have your phone handy, go ahead and scan that QR code. Or if you're on your computer, go ahead and just go to this URL. That's how you get these worksheets for doing the work that we did in Gather. So what we're going to be doing is calculating local market trends using these forms. The RAIN April MLS report, pages 10, 15, and 22, and also Pam's supply and demand form for 2022 through 2023. So this is what the RAIN report looks like. I'm sure you've seen it. We are going to be using the new listings summary page on page 10, as well as the pending sales summary page, although actually we're not really going to be using this a whole lot, and the settled sales summary page on page 22. So those are the important pages, and the market study page, that is a separate document. So if you're a pen and paper kind of person, go ahead and take a second, print those out from that page, and let's get started with some math. So first off, let's take a look at the new listing summary, page number 10. What we're going to be doing is, number one, making sure we're on the correct page right here, new listing summary. We're going to be looking at south side listings just for the sake of this exercise, and we're going to be looking at the year-to-date totals. That is going to be those last three values for 2021, 2022, and 2023 for total listings in the south side year-to-date. Next, well, the pending sales summary page is interesting, although not super necessary. It could be used to predict the next month's activity, but for the purpose of conducting this math, we don't actually need it. Lastly, the settled sales summary page. We're going to be looking at those same year-to-date numbers for the south side. So if you have it in front of you, go ahead and circle those. Make sure that you know these are the values that we are going to be comparing. Okay. Next, let's get out that market study page. The top half is really just a reference table so that you can see what the arrows that trend mean when in relationship with each other. So what that means is if supply is up but demand is down, we're typically in a buyer's market. If supply is down but demand is up, we're typically in a seller's market. If they're going in the same direction, this may be a market in transition. And when we say up or down, that means in comparison to the previous year. So or maybe even the previous month. That is what we are going to be determining today. So what we are going to do is refer back to those sheets, those little areas that we highlighted or circled, and we're going to plug in the numbers appropriately into this chart. So we looked at the total listings year to date. That's going to be in this supply column for 2023, and we plugged that in here. And then total sales demand, we're going to plug that in here. So that's for 2023. So we're going to do the same thing with all the other years and have those values already written out. Now, what do we do with these? Here's what we do. We calculate the absorption ratio by dividing sales over listings. So sales divided by listings. That's going to look like 5702 divided by 7746. And that math, I already did it, is 0.736, which is 73.6%. That's the absorption ratio. That's the amount of listings that actually were absorbed by the market not every single house in inventory actually gets sold, and that's an indicator of the health of the market and how much control sellers have overall in the market at that moment. Okay, so we're gonna write that in on our page just next to the 2023 values so that we can see what the absorption rate overall is so far in 2023. We're going to do the same thing for 2022 here. So again, sales divided by listings, which is 7801 divided by 9873, which is 0.7901, which of course is 79%. An absorption ratio of 79%, which is higher actually than what we're looking at this year. So we can interpret that a little later, but for right now, we're going to put that value right there. Last but not least, for 2021, sales divided by listings, 8227 divided by 10749 is 0.7653, which is an absorption ratio of 76.5%. So, these are values that Pam gave us. I wrote them down real quick, and so I'm going to share them with you. It's a really handy chart, and I'll probably make some sort of a little cheat sheet printout for you. But for right now, let's take a look. So, an absorption ratio of over 70% would mostly mean that there are a majority of multiple offer situations in the market. An absorption ratio of anything over 50% means that it's a seller's market. So just looking at those rates right there in red, we're definitely in a seller's market. Even if it does drop a little bit like it is right now to 73.6%, sellers are definitely still in control. And honestly, there's not even like a question about it. It doesn't look like sellers are in danger of losing control very soon. Because, going to that third line right there, that 50 to 60% range is where things could shift. That's that transitionary market where the deal could kind of go either way. Right now, that's not where we're at. And then, less than 50% absorption rate will typically mean it's a buyer's market. Sellers are not in control, and buyers have the ability to make a few more demands in their deal. All right. So, these arrows are the market compared to the last year's market. So what I did is I just took a look at these two values, 98.73 in 2022 and 77.46 in 2023, and it looks like that went down. So I put the blue arrow right there. Same thing for 2021 to 2022. So we have those right there. That means that the market has been going down and in transition for a little while. It's not a clear seller's market. It's not a clear buyer's market. It is in transition. All right. So once again, make sure that you are interpreting these absorption ratios accordingly, because once we have the data, we want to know what to tell people about it. All right. So what we would tell people is, thus far in 2023, we are in a seller's market in Southside Hampton Roads, but overall, the market is down from last year, which could mean sellers may not get what they used to last year. It could mean that buyers may not want to wait because inventory will disappear. It's still a seller's market. It could also mean that buyers will be disadvantaged for a while. So you might want to up your bid. You might want to make those concessions or skip appraisals, God forbid, or things like that, or not appraisals, home inspections. You know what I mean. That's the kind of strategy that you can get by looking at the data and doing the math yourself. So now we're going to go back to Pam.
Okay, let's come on. We got it right. Are you ready?
Ready to do.
Okay, first thing was, are these all in the right block? That's first. Number 2. Okay, so that's obviously off. All right, so is that what you got? Off by 21.5%? Yes. Okay, so listings right now at the end of April were off by 21%. So we know clearly, I don't care what it feels like, I don't even care what's happening with the demand, the buyers, having a market where your listings are off by 21% in April, which is usually going to be our hottest market, is not in favor of the buyer. I mean, that doesn't mean the buyer's not going to be gaining some traction, but we have to be realistic about what we're dealing with. All right? So we're going to go to settled sales, make sure you're in full pending. That's into your page 22. And those are your pages. It's 5, 10, and 22. Those are the 3 easy pages to pull out of this every time you do it. And then in April, is that your number? 5702, 7801, and 8227, right blocks? Yeah. Okay, and that's going to be off by 26.9%. Again, this is still growing bigger, like there's 27% less in the market than there are currently listings at 21.5%. But it's not dramatic enough yet for it to be making a dent and putting the buyers in the driver's seat.
Seven sellers in the driver's seat.
And this kind of activity also becomes very important that, again, you're in a hyperlocal mode. Because you could be going into a neighborhood that you're going to take a listing on, and you can just take what we're doing right now, and you can drill in list date received. Remember, we had list date received equals for whatever the time frame was, and then we had close date equals. I could then go in and add another criteria when I put it in and put in neighborhood. And you just search by neighborhood, and all I'm going to get at that point are all the stats. So if you farm an area, or you farm a location in the city and you want to track it, you can easily do this just by drilling your data down the sound and tracking that on a monthly basis and know how it particularly is performing. Okay? Mm-hmm. So if you are in this situation, which is really what we're looking at, we've got a 76% absorption in April, 79 in 22, 73. So this is obviously falling. We know it's got to be going down, right? It's little by little getting less, but we're still off by 21%. So is it clear as mud at this point, right? When you go sit down and talk to somebody, you're surely not walking in and telling a seller they have to give away their home.
Correct.
And you're surely not telling the buyer that they're going to be in a position in every case where they're going to have 20 houses or 20 people that they're competing with. It's somewhere in the middle of that, and you have to be realistic when you sit down to do the buyer counseling session and the seller counseling session based on what the market is telling you. Okay? So if we look at this, let me see if look at what we've got going on. So again, remember what we said, here is the demilitarize, right? Right here. And look what happened, just like here.
Sir.
So, we can look at this and go, well, gosh, I mean, okay, so this is kind of a little bit of a black line, so to speak. We have almost as much in listing inventory decreasing as we do in sales decreasing. But the reality is when you start tracking where every year is in terms of absorption ratio, is the market moving from a very strong seller's market to a more balanced market, right? But a balanced market would tend to almost look like this, right? It would look like this. What this is telling you is the market is changing. But this market is definitely changing, which is why there's dynamics of people confused about who's in control. The difference, though, is as it changes, it's heading down. So you still have it performing like it's in a seller's market because you've got the absorption so high. Anything, again, over 70 is supposed to be an indicator of multiple offers. But the difference is this is one thing to be an indicator of multiple offers going up and getting stronger and stronger. This is another indicator of it going down and the dynamic of the market changing. So high absorption, market's moving towards that center space. So you've got sellers who aren't in the same strength position they were before, but buyers are surely not the driver's seat. Okay? And we're just going to keep watching this, because if this drops again and we go below 70 and we're heading for 60, you can bet you need to start preparing your sellers for a very different market. I mean, if you had known that here, right, in 2006, wouldn't that have been different?
Yeah.
You knew right here and this continue, wouldn't you have known that the seller needs to be told, I don't care how spoiled you are, it's changing. Okay? Does this help?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah.
Okay? Look at that. 85 was that peak up here. Almost the same thing, but heading right down the same way. So just be aware. When it gets into that center space or gets close to it, you know you're really in a market in transition. You know you're crossing through from one to the next. We're not there yet, which is why, again, the seller is still in a place where they don't have to give away their house. Okay?
So it just don't get it.
Say again.
That we will live fairly get there.
It does.
His income rate in Carolina.
That is a great point.
About output like bracket.
And actually, that's a great thing to almost end on, because what this is telling us right here is right now we're taking into account supply and demand. But remember that we said undergirding every market are all the economic factors. So if interest rates change and all of a sudden buying power changes and that thing starts tracking up and you can see clearly what is going on. If this just starts to kind of go like this, where we just kind of settle into kind of it's still going to be to the favor of the seller. She's going to be market pockets. Okay, that's a really good point. That's when you really do start watching other factors. Is unemployment increasing, decreasing? I mean, this housing affordability stabilizing? Is the average sales price starting to get a flat line, or is it still kind of going up? Because if some buyer is telling me they want to wait, I think they should wait. They probably have to wait for about 2 or 3 years, right? Because if we're sitting up here, I mean, this didn't happen in a month. This didn't happen in a year. It takes time for a market to move. I mean, unless we have an absolute market crash, there's nothing in this market right now that's telling us that it's to the buyer's benefit to just sit and wait. The one thing I do know, a 1% interest rate increase is a what percent decrease in buying power? 10% decrease in buying power. So a 0.5% interest rate increase is a 5% decrease in buying power. If I'm sitting at $400,000 and the interest rate goes up by 0.5%, what price home would I have to buy for the same payment?
800,000.
5%, if it's a 0.5%, 380, and a 0.5% increase equals a 5% decrease in buying power. And I'm looking at 400, where would I have to buy in order to get the same payment? At the 0.5% in 380?
375.
380, right? Because a 0.5%, that 0.5% increase is a 5% decrease in buying power. So 5% of 400,000 is $20,000. They'd have to go to 380,000 in order to be able to get the same payment. So when somebody's telling me that they're waiting, then I'm looking and going, okay, based on what everything is doing, this is surely not going to indicate that prices are dropping. That's not a market where prices are dropping. So I'm going to go look at my data. I'm going to find out what the average sales price is as comparison to last month and last year. And I'm going to use that data with the buyer and say, well, let's look at this. Because market increase on price is this, even if the rate changes this much, you're not closing this gap in regards to it being to your benefit. And if you're waiting for this inventory to dramatically grow, let me show you our numbers when it comes to inventory. Inventory right now is off like 28% or whatever it happens to be. I mean, data right now matters more than it's ever mattered. In a shifting market, you have to know your data. Does that help today?
Yes.
Seriously.
Yes.
How many of y'all feel like you can use something today that within this next? Tree, you're not raising your hand.
Good, I'm actually.
What? Already put it in. Thank you. Thank you. Just put me on the spot. Okay, y'all. Is there any other question that we have before we wrap up today? Well, go ahead.
I think that this June on Labor Budget 2022, if you got picture of each slide, it's set June. It was good with that chance. Right. Oh, this again. Oh, good. That's legit.
All right. Take your count.
You're welcome. Any other questions? Yes.
You say the part about how to find me. There's statistics in the tongue.
And so I tell you what, if you do it next month, I'll try and bring in just some quick accesses to that. Because things like, your unemployment being going into, oh my gosh, website. What is it? Also, my mind is so full. Census.gov. It's BLS.gov. The Bureau of Labor Statistics.gov will give you a tracking for unemployment in every market. You can drill into your market and it'll tell you where they're going. And again, if you're just looking at that every month, it track you, you'll see whether unemployment's improving or whether it's getting worse. And if you've got unemployment getting worse in a market, so let's just say unemployment is getting worse. Interest rates are going up, right? Housing affordability is flatlining. What does that tell you about the undergirthing of the market? Supply and demand, absorption rates dropping. Everything is indicating that the market is moving in the direction of being a stronger buyer's market. Okay? Yes.
Okay, so you made a point to say that absorption ratios are not absorption rates,
Yes.
right? And when I look at these numbers from what we just calculated here on this thing here, it seems to me that the absorption rate for April is almost 6 months. Is that wrong? Do you feel like it doesn't matter?
Well, I guarantee you it's not. Because if we went in here and looked at the absorption rate in this, if we looked in April and checked the absorption rate, let me see if I can get you to look at it this year and probably it was not much pretty plan. Let me see here. And they have an absorption rate program, and here's the months.
Oh, right, okay.
Okay? Absorption rates right now in the market are 1 to 2 months. Now, they were 0.8 to 1.5, so is that changing? A little bit, but is it still favoring the seller? Yes.
Yeah.
So, when you're reading these things every 30 days, it gives you all the indicators of where the market's going. And we've always said there's a crystal ball. There's absolutely a crystal ball. It will tell you about a 3 to 6 month picture of what's coming at you if you just track it monthly. And if anybody has to go, you're welcome to go. You've been so good about just sitting here. But is there any other question? Anybody else have anything else? Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, you got the original version.
Here, is what the fact is this been feminine. How is that a bad? It's the absorption rate. It's how long it's on large.
Absorption rates are the number of months necessary to clear current inventory. Okay? So if I'm looking back and I've checked that same market, if I'm taking a listing and I'm checking that same market, and when I look at previous history, and it takes every 30 days, 3 houses in that market clear that align with the one I get ready to list, and then there's 15 houses on the market. At 3 a month, that's 5 months to clear inventory. If there are 3 houses on the market, that's 1 month to clear inventory. So it's just a totally different picture. But you do one and compare it to the other, and it's the one will help and align with the other one to straighten it. Okay?
You see you later.